Hello, welcome to part 5 of our 5-part series of knee pain assessments, and this last one is possibly the biggest one of them all, and also probably the most difficult to do. And this is where we're looking at movement. So bear in mind there's a lot of movements I would still look at as well as these, but these are the main ones that obviously for specifically for knees. And this first one is the squat movement pattern. So with the squat, what we really want to look for is how things are moving together as a team of joints. So is the ankle, the knee, the hip all working together as a team, or are things beginning to break down? This is why I'm doing this video in slow motion. I did actually record it earlier, but I decided I'm going to break it down so I can magnify some parts because there's so many moving pieces on this. So firstly, with this squat, and Mel showing us here a demonstration of a reasonably good squat. What we're looking for is, firstly, do they have good ankle flexion? So if you remember from part 2, where we looked at mobility, part 3, where we were looking at mobility, we really needed to see, does that ankle have full range? Now that may not have full range because there's something going on at the foot, which is what we saw in the last part with stability things. So if the big toe's a problem, if the feet are a problem, the ankle becomes stiff, rigid. If the ankle becomes stiff and rigid, you can't get the full degree of ankle, your shin sort of coming forward enough to then create strength at the quadriceps. You see how there's like a chain reaction of events that all lead to problems around either the knee or the lumbar spine. That's the other area. So if you don't have knee pain, you've a very good chance you're going to get back pain, and vice versa, back pain, you've a very good chance you get knee pain, because they're sort of intimately linked via problems we see at the hips and also at the ankle. All right. So in the case of this squat, we'll watch Mel do a few, and when I sort of have a look at a couple of good form and bad form. So we get her to demonstrate a couple of poor form versions to show you what we would commonly see. So a person with knee pain usually tries to avoid the knee, and they do sort of strange things. So in this case, they're still probably working the knee, but what I often see is where they actually don't want to put any flexion into the knee because it's so painful. Stiffness has definitely developed, so they're losing flexibility, and they're also definitely losing strength, because in this movement pattern is the one that you develop the most strength. So everyone's heard of the VMO, and the quadriceps are very important, and there's no way you can build strength into them from doing this, because this is really a deadlift. You can sort of see the angles of the shin and the spine there. That's the position of a deadlift. That's not a squat at all. And this is something we would very often see with the knee pain person. They've compensated and learned that this is the better way to do squats from now on. So in an assessment, I'm looking for that, because in the mobility things, I may not have seen this come up, and I may not have seen stability things on their basic test that the toes work fine, the ankle's got full range, yet when they squat, they look like this. And that's when things don't begin to make sense, and you've got to really sort of unravel things and keep coming back to this, because this is the thing you want to, that you're really basing everything on. Because if this begins to look more like normal, and this is another version of a poor squat, this would be an example of poor hip mobility, where the hip's going into posterior tilt and they're actually sitting into their pain. So in this case, in the last one, they weren't developing any strength through the quads. This one, they're only using the quads. So they've got like no glute function at all. They're just a terrible. So basically they're sending all of their spine into their knees because they can't absorb anything into their posterior chain. So that's a secondary mistake I might be looking for on this. But and then I also want to look at front-on positions in a second. So there's Mel showing another version of a poor squat, and that's again sitting into the knee, no use of the posterior chain. So if we have a look at her doing a good one again, and you can sort of see here how she really get that. See how these are very much like a parallel to each other. That's an example of a good squat, and obviously she doesn't have knee pain, and actually squatting is probably her best movement, to be honest. From front on with the squat, because I also want to look at it front on, is when I might begin to see deviations and compensation. So if we're assuming her right leg is the injured leg, and we see a good version, there's an even distribution of weight with right and left. with a poor form of a squat where there's something going on, from your assessment you can see it from the front. If you're looking for it, you might see the toes turning out, and you'll definitely see some sort of a strange feeling movement where they're moving to one side. They're basically like when you've got a limp. You move your weight off the injured leg to the other leg, so the other leg ends up doing more of the load. So they're things you look for in the front-on position with the squat. Now that's only one of the patterns that we'd want to look at. We also need to look at some of the other ones. Here's another demonstration of good form with that squat. But we also need to look at the deadlift again, and I did actually show this in the previous video when we were looking at stability, and I did say at the time this is technically a movement pattern as well. I put it in the stability one because it really is a huge thing, a thing to see for how they generate stability within their spine, and their hips, how do they move them together. So this is like called the Romanian deadlift. Again, it's quite a simple movement, but it's amazing how many people do it so poorly. The most important thing when you understand with this, because this is, like I was saying in the last one, there's no real knee movement here. So this person should be able to do this perfectly. And this is how they get the glutes to really fire, and which it becomes very important in a second when we do single leg stuff. And it's the single leg stuff that is, along with the squat, probably the most difficult. So if the person is not doing this already, you know that there's no way you're going to be able to develop correct glute and pelvic control, because they can't even do it on its basic version of just bending over. So this is where you begin in your test, and you're looking for things. So again, if the position I'm looking for, as opposed to the squat, I want a vertical position with my shin, a neutral position in the lumbar curve. So just that nice little lumbar curve. So if I had a stick on her back, I'd get my fingers between her back and the stick. All right, and everything just working perfectly, and she can groove herself in and out of that with no trouble. All right, so that's what you're looking for in your testing, because like I said in a second, we want to look at this in a single leg position, and that's when we begin to see stability problems really surface, and where the problems really begin to lie. Because in this one here, by the way, with two legs, the need for foot stability is minimal. But with one leg, it's incredibly important, and this is where we'll see now. So I use two tests for this. First one is what I call the toe touch drill, which I've done a few videos on that already today. But basically, it's like a multi-directional movement, and we're trying to see, does she control the stance leg in its natural alignment. So she's going to be moving around in a like around the middle of a clock, and she's touching different numbers on the clock. And what we're observing is how she uses her hips to do so, and whether or not she can keep that alignment through the ankle, the knee and the hip perfectly straight. If we start to see anything that looks like this, we know she can't control it. And from side on, if we also observe, is she too upright? Does she use her hips, especially on the backward ones, the sideways ones and the backward ones? They're the real big ones, and you're just observing what you see, watching where things break down. Is it through the foot or is it through the hip? And just sort of watching what she does, comparing the good leg to the bad leg, and then you can really get a good gauge on how they generate stability in the frontal plane, because it's often where they don't control it, and where the injury happens at the knee, because especially what we see with ACL tears, when they're moving in a cutting direction, which is sideways movement, they just the whole knee just drifts in. All right, so this is a really good simple test. You can do this even if they have a fair degree of pain, because there's minimal amount of strength. It's just purely observing, can they keep their alignment? Do they even know what good alignment is? So this is where you really can be a very valuable test in getting it right. So I get Mel to demonstrate in a second what a poor form looks like, so you can get an idea of and when it breaks down from either the hip or the foot. And we get to see here her doing a single leg stance, single leg deadlift, sorry. So the toe touch drill is the basic version, and this is the one where it needs a bit more strength. So I will do both versions. I may not do this one if there's extreme pain. If there's only a minimal amount of pain, I will definitely do this one. Again, this one needs a lot more strength into it than the other one. And here's an example of where that point of no return, where that knee is going to be really torqued, you begin to see it. And like I said, it'll happen either at the foot or at the hip. Usually one goes before the other, and you just observe what you see. So in this case, that was the foot. You can see how that's collapsed in. And then the next one, I ask her to show us what it looks like with the hip one. Actually, that was the good form. Yeah, and basically, yeah, so she's just showing how it should look like from a good alignment perspective. On the side-on angle, this is again where you see the hip. So we should see what we saw before with the two legs, and again that nice sort of lumbar curve being held in neutral throughout, so she can generate glute strength. And this is where we might see issues with how they move from not moving their hips enough. All right, so all these single leg tests are very valuable, but start with the two leg ones, and then just record what you see, and that's where you begin. All right, so I hope these videos are giving you some good ideas on what to look for, and there's many other tests that we may do at times, but these are the basic ones, the ones that give you a lot of information, and then you just need to work out, okay, what do I do from this? What does it all mean? Where do I start? Do I need to work on mobility only because there's a lot of that in the way, or is there none of that and it's mainly stability problems? And maybe it's something more to do with the foot, maybe it's more to do with the hip. Everyone's a bit different. You've just got to use a series of tests to know where to start. All right, and I hope I've given you enough information to get you going. Make sure you check the description under the video, because there's plenty of stuff in there that'll show you what to do next once you see all this stuff. All right, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on our next one.